I'm wondering, Eric, if this has to do with, was it created under Melissa's account and now you're using a different account?
We're live.
I'm wondering, Eric, if this has to do with, was it created under Melissa's account and now you're using a different account?
We're live. We're up.
Oh, so I've got, I'm gonna,
has to do with, was it created under Melissa's account?
I'm going to close the my browser so I don't hear any of that since Melissa is in the. Okay. So
just give me like 30 seconds to find you.
Yeah, I think this is.
That's probably the best way to go about it.
Well, it looked like it had started the regular scheduled meeting, but I ended it.
Okay, but it says you're live.
Okay, so we should just get going?
Well, no, just give me a minute. Let me get everybody over there.
Okay. We're getting everybody moved over to this other link.
Let me make sure that this is.
I don't know. I've noticed some wacky things with the internet the last couple of days.
All right, so.
It's been a wacky couple of days.
Yes. Yes, it has.
Should we have some entertaining banter?
I've had weird things like the emergency broadcast message that, gives you an Amber Alert. These blank things that didn't, it's like, I remember in the news a few years back, they accidentally reported that a nuclear missile was on the way to Hawaii. And like for about 15 minutes, people were thinking they were about to die. Do you remember that story?
No, I don't remember that.
And
That's
so,
a crazy train.
And I mean, I read some stories about people that were like, what they were thinking about. I know that's morbid, but it was some guy messed up and pushed the wrong button somewhere. And I don't know if he got fired or not, but he pushed the wrong button and it sent off the wrong message off to people's phones. And that was not the right message for people to get that day.
Yeah, my wife's parents were there at the time, and they had their whole hotel was evacuated into the basement, and people were going crazy. Yeah, that was nuts.
So yeah, technology. So okay,
All right,
we're ready to start.
It says we've got 16 people over here, so
Okay.
let's go ahead and start.
Yeah,
I'm gonna work to get everybody over here.
Okay, that's super unfortunate, but we're all here. So let's see, to introduce myself real quick, because people sometimes see me, but I'm usually the guy behind the curtain a lot of times. I'm Eric Nielsen, and we are live now from Surprise, Arizona. And yes, it can get cold here. It doesn't snow here right where I'm at, but it is chilly today. And so I met Melissa shortly after she got divorced, and she had 3 children when we met, and she was homeschooling them with the Waldorf method, and she was worried that that was going to be a deal breaker for me. But what my experience was, I worked for a little newspaper in Idaho, and I was given the education beat. So I spent a lot of time in the schools, not as a parent or a school employee, but as we wouldn't expect journalists to be an impartial, detached observer of what was going on. And I was learning about all these policies that were being put in place at the time, like No Child Left Behind. And I was really floored because the focus was all on the tests, these standardized tests. And not only was the focus on the standardized test, the schools were told that nobody could not pass them. And if they didn't, there would be cuts in funding, there would be cuts in teacher pay if not everybody didn't pass this test. And then I found out that tests and the test scores attached to the schools were affecting the property values. So then in my mind, I thought, these kids are commodities. These kids are on a conveyor belt. They're numbers. And I thought it was kind of horrifying. And so like the image of like the Pink Floyd movie popped in my head when I thought about it. Granted, that's not exactly what it looked like, but it started to feel like that. And so when I met Melissa, and I was like, I didn't even question it all, because I totally got what it was she was doing and why, because I'd spent all this time in these schools, not as a parent or a teacher, but just watching what was going on. So that's me, and I'm going to introduce everybody else. We have Jack Petrash. He is a longtime Waldorf teacher, and he runs the Nova Institute, which is working to bridge a gap between mainstream education and Waldorf education. We have Paul Johnson, and he is a father of 3 children that are being homeschooled with the Waldorf method. We have Jamie York. He refers to himself as a math missionary. He runs the Jamie York Math Academy, and he's written Making Math Meaningful. We have Gerhard Siepker, and he is a class 2 teacher with the Seasons of 7 virtual school. And we have Mark Lewis, and he's a music teacher with Seasons of 7 virtual school. And Matt Shelton, we have just met. He has started a new website called waldorfdads.com, and I've been looking at it, and it's really, I think there's going to be some really cool things there, and it's him sharing some of his journey with Waldorf and his family. And then we have David Sewell McCain, and he one of the things he's probably most known for is Sparkle Stories. And there's probably not a day that goes by that I don't hear the opening tune to the stories. Actually, there's probably not a day that I don't. There's probably not a day I don't hear that song about 3 or 4 times, because our youngest daughter Soraya is a really big fan. So now we're going to get going on some of the questions. And so, and that's something I talked to you about. We work with families all over the world, but primarily it's the mom that contacts us, or is a customer, or is seeking coaching. And time again, it's, how do I bring this to my husband? How do I get my husband to understand what I'm doing? That's not always the case, but that's something that we come up with often. And one concern we get is the worry that Waldorf education is not rigorous enough, especially in the realms of math and science. And I thought I'd start this question out to Jamie and to Jack, what their perspective would be on that concern.
I'll let you go first, Jack. Go ahead.
Thank you, Jamie. Well, honestly, I've often had the same concern. I like to think that our schools are rigorous in our teaching of history and geography and math and science. But I think rigor is a good thing. When I was trained at the school where I did my graduate work, it was a school where rigor was an important part, but the understanding was that rigor is broadly based, because you want children to be rigorous in what they learn so that they're well educated. You want them to be rigorous in the way that they're taught to write, because writing is such a fundamental part of expressing your thoughts. But you also want them to be rigorous in how they listen to their teachers and to each other. And you want them to be rigorous in the way in which they do their work, their sense of responsibility. So I like the word rigor, and I like to think that our schools should be rigorous. Having said that, I often think about, how do we prepare kids for tomorrow, for the world that we can envision? And that reminds me that we can't give them answers, because the answers that we give them probably will not be adequate for the questions that they're going to encounter as young adults and as adults. And so instead, you want to give them capacities. And those capacities have to do with the three basic tenets of Waldorf education, which is educating children to be clear, attentive thinkers, and to be resilient, emotionally engaged students, and to be responsible in terms of what they do. And those capacities are really what we want to develop rigorously. So I often think about that when I think about, well, how are we doing with math and science? And one of the things about Waldorf education, and I don't mean to go on too long, Jamie, is that we're really teaching children to think differently. And that's been my takeaway from my years of teaching. And that's been my understanding of what was intended when the Waldorf schools were started, that we're going to educate children to think with their whole human intelligence, which means both their analytical, their cognitive intelligence, and also their intuitive, emotional, affective intelligence. And so a lot of what we do is we teach through art, and as we'll speak about, I'm sure we'll hear, we teach through story, we teach through interpersonal relationships. We just teach in many different ways to help children have a good, sound education. And I just wanted to show, I have a couple of examples of work that my students did in 8th grade, my last class. And it really, I think, doesn't do a bad job of showing the rigor. This was from an anatomy block in 8th grade. And I don't know if you can see this, but it's the vertebrae, human vertebrae. And, you know, when children draw something with this detail, they know it. They know it deeply. And then they understand what they're learning on a deeper level. And here's just one other illustration. But if you know middle school students, you know that getting them to work this carefully doesn't just happen. There has to be a rigor. And it's a rigor in what they bring to their lessons. So that's my hope. I think Waldorf schools should be rigorous. I think that they often aren't known enough for their rigor. Those are my thoughts, Jamie.
Thank you, Jack. I would agree with everything that you just said. I think I'm going to put a slightly different spin on it, however, and that is oftentimes when I hear these kind of questions, they're really questions that come out of a place of fear. And fear plays, I think, a pretty big role in our society. I used to say that long before, you know, some of the issues that we have in today's world were visible. But yeah, it's how much of this is coming out of a place of fear. And then secondly, what do we mean by rigor? What does that really mean? Now, I would agree with Jack that rigor really means an education that really goes into depth. And in terms of, I'm a math teacher, and so in terms of mathematics, it means to think deeply. But usually when people don't think of this think of the question, what do we mean by, in this case, this question of what is rigor? If we don't think about that thoroughly, then we actually have, I think, quite a misconception, because usually what it kind of means is, well, it means that they're kind of ahead. It means that they're kind of winning some sort of competition. And I think underneath that is this unconscious assumption that somehow the purpose of education is a competition that we need to win. And honestly, I like to think anyway that Waldorf education is really rising above that. And I think I absolutely believe that we need to get out of that. Now, I should say, first of all, that I'm a product of that mindset. You know, and I went to a decent public school in Connecticut, and to me, the purpose of school was, as a competition, was to win the competition or to do well in it anyway. And so, yeah, I learned how to play the game. And certainly from the point of view of mathematics ended up being some sort of game. The game being, okay, your job is to do the homework that you need to do, or at least give the teacher the impression that you've done the homework so that you didn't get a bad homework grade, for instance, and then to pass all these tests. And I have to say, it wasn't based upon deep thinking. And in fact, to some degree, I was thinking as a student that I was successful at the game if I could actually do well on my tests with the minimum amount of effort, and perhaps I didn't learn it very deeply at all, and that was totally okay because my test scores were good. And I ended up going to a good engineering school and continued to play that game and be good at the game. And so I like to think that Waldorf education has risen above that, and we're not playing that game in terms of a competition. Now, don't get me wrong, I absolutely believe that our students not only should have a rigorous education, but they should be prepared for whatever comes next in their life. And yes, I want them to be, and we say this often as Waldorf educators, we want them to be prepared for life. And so to penetrate these questions, what does it mean to be prepared for life? That's a very interesting question that we could have a whole conference and discussion about that. Or let's just say, what does it mean to be prepared for college? Now, I've taught for a long time in Waldorf High School here and at Shining Mountain Waldorf School in Boulder, Colorado. And I've had many students prepared to go off to Ivy League schools, engineering schools, the whole gamut. And they were very well prepared. I would say they were better prepared than what their peers were. What do I mean by that? Well, in terms of preparation, I'd have to say that a concern that I've heard voiced often, and you hear this, that, for instance, if you talk to somebody who is in the world of engineering or the tech world and so forth, you'll often hear complaints that the people coming to them, graduating from college and now starting in their company, there's often the complaint that they're not really prepared for what they really need. What do they really need? They need people that can truly problem solve. So the complaint is these people coming out of engineering schools, and they're fine, they're good at, as I was, they're good at solving problems they've seen 50 times before. They're good at solving problems that the teacher told them how to do, that they were essentially blindly given without thinking, just memorize how to do this, take the test, and you're okay. But they're not very good at true problem solving. They're not very good at thinking of creative solutions. So this leads to another question. Yeah, so in terms of a math teacher, this is what it's all about. It's about deeply thinking about questions. That's what math and science should be. And so this next question is, what does it really mean to problem solve? What allows one to think creatively about new problems? Because as Jack said, we don't know what the problems are going to be in the future. We don't know what the big questions are. We don't really know what society will look like and what questions and that we're going to need to solve. But what allows for someone to solve new problems that they haven't seen the solutions to before, what allows that is the capacity to think creatively. And what allows for that? That's a big question right there. What allows for someone to think creatively? And I would say it's not this race to get ahead. You're not going to be better at math and science because you've been fed cold, meaningless facts about, I remember being in 6th grade and knowing, an oxygen molecule or an oxygen atom had, I think it's 8 electrons, protons, neutrons. I knew all this stuff. I even made a styrofoam model of it, which, to be honest, that isn't really what an oxygen atom is, but I was told that. And sure, there are many other scientific facts that I memorized, but I can't say that I was really educated in a way that I could think creatively at that point in my life. So, these are questions, and I like to think that Waldorf education, by not engaging in this blind race to just get ahead, but instead to go deeply into subjects and to really, this is what I try to do as a Waldorf math teacher, to get them to take the time, slow down, and to get them to discover for themselves some of the mathematical principles. And it would be true for science and other subjects as well. This idea that education isn't something that we just feed to students and that they just we just pour it into them. Instead, it should be something that they are an active participant in their own development. And this idea to imagine that discovery should be a huge part of math and science. And let me ask you, in your own education, did you have the good fortune to really experience on a regular basis what it meant and what it felt like to be discovering things for yourself? I know I didn't. And oftentimes people who would look at a program and say, that's rigorous. And it's not really, because they're actually not given that opportunity to discover, to create, and to actually experience the essence of what true math and science really should and ought to be.
I like that you mentioned fear, and almost a sense of lack that people would bring to their thoughts on education. As when I worked as an education reporter, and this was over 15 years ago, when the No Child Left Behind thing was starting up, and the State Board of Education was throwing out all these different ideas about how to get where they thought they were supposed to be. And I talked to the woman on the phone, and she started rattling off like, our test scores are behind China, our test scores are behind Finland, they're behind Japan. And my first thought was, how do you know they're the same tests that everybody's taking? But there was this hysterics behind it. And then I thought, if the hysterics is at the top, at least in the state of Idaho that I was in, then it's coming down to the teachers and then to the kids, the anxiety somehow that it mattered whether that a kid in China scored better than them on a test.
Well, I mean, think of it. When that term was first coined, leave no child left behind, I think collectively our entire society, or certainly our entire parent body in this country, kind of collectively looked at each other and said, oh my God, is my child behind? So immediately it put them in this place of fear, right? And that's what it is. It's so fear-based. Our education, our world today is obviously increasingly fear-based. And this is a concern. And I think we need, we all know that when you're in a place of fear, you don't make good decisions. You can't think clearly. And so this is something also that we need, I think, to talk to parents about. How much of what you're saying right now somehow has an element of fear behind it? And can we get out of that and truly ask, what do you really want for your child? What is really important? What do you think a good education really ought to look like? And very few parents, when you really go deeply into that question and ask them, will say, yeah, I just want them to have as much stuff as quickly as possible. And I want them to have lots and lots of homework. Very few parents would ever say that.
In the same conversation, this woman was telling me about plans to get kids on education paths based on careers that they were deciding they wanted to do in like 5th grade. And I joked and I said, some of these kids want to be, at the time, like Tony Hawk, the skateboard guy. And I think if I was in the room, she would have thrown something at my head. She just went blah. But so that, but yeah, that trickles down to everywhere. So a question I had for David and for the others here that also want to talk about this is stories and telling of stories is a huge part of the education method, especially at the beginning. So I wanted to ask you, why is the role of stories and storytelling so important in Waldorf education?
Thank you. Well, I've been thinking about this, and my relationship to stories has changed a little since teaching. And it's become really pedestrian to me and become really sort of ordinary and less a skill and more a thing that we all do, like walking. And so like Jamin McMillan's relationship to walking is different because he has so much consciousness about going from here to there. It's a beautiful thing, watching a dancer walk. But most of us don't think about walking. We just go over there because that's what we use walking for, is to go there. And I think of storytelling that way, that human beings, and definitely the child version of human beings, that's just how we communicate. We just tell stories all day. But very few of us actually have consciousness of that process and intentionality behind that process. Whereas in Waldorf education, there is great appreciation for storytelling, not just there was once a frog. Really, everything that is happening in the day is imbued with storytelling. And so there's a lot of consciousness and intentionality and recognition that it's almost like, the teacher training doesn't use this phrase, but sometimes I do. It's almost like casting spells. So not only do you want yourself to be understood, and you want the listener to really receive the seed of what it is that you're trying to give them, but you're bringing transformation. You have an intention of the classroom to just chill out for a minute, and so you say, that reminds me of a story, and then suddenly the room's quiet because we all want to hear that. It's a switch that goes off in our head, story coming, and so we change. And Waldorf does that, and it's not alone. Just think of No Child Left Behind. That's not Waldorf, but that's a great story. That's a transformative moment that changed everybody in a few words. No Child Left Behind. I'm on board with that. I don't want to leave a child behind, just like you were saying, Jamie. So, the advertising world and worlds of politics and big business, they all understand the power of storytelling. And Waldorf Education understands the power of storytelling. It just gets people to do stuff. I hate to put it that bluntly. We do it in a really loving way, built out of spiritual science, to understand like the different levels of what it is that we're doing and taking responsibility for that. Whereas I don't know that a lot of sales and politics, et cetera, necessarily do that. So I do think that within the rigor and within the striving is also a recognition that we're giving these children a consciousness around how they talk. So when they go to a college interview, when they go to someone that they're interested in and ask them on a date, so that when they go, to another country and are trying to figure out what's going on, they know that they can tell a good story in a short way to really make their point, get the message across, and that's pretty useful. So that's what I would say.
That's good. Does anyone else have anything they'd like to add to that?
I do.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
Oh.
Yeah, if I may. Thank you, David. That's beautiful. The the idea that we're all storytelling all the time, and that in Waldorf Education there is intention behind it, and there's transformative power there. And when my children were little, and if they were going through something, my wife or I would make up a story that would be addressing exactly whatever issue they were having, but it was veiled, and the frog that David mentioned, would be my son, and the story would send the frog on some sort of an adventure that would address the issue exactly that he was dealing with, and offer some insight into it, offers maybe even a few ways that he might solve the problem that he's having. And that's something that my children have kind of, have taken into the world and figured things out and learned how to solve problems and have become fuller human beings by this power of storytelling, this transformative power. I think it's a basic human need to hear and tell stories. And I think that when there is intention behind it, and especially loving intention, that transformative power is incredible.
Well, that's really good. Thank you. So move on to the next one. This is kind of more directed towards Paul and Matt. What would you tell other dads about the benefits of Waldorf education for your children and family?
Yeah, so I'm new to I guess getting on to Waldorf. My wife is from Germany. She's very familiar with it, and now that I became a father about a year ago, starting at that point, I'm looking at education, and this was when I found Waldorf. It was I think something that I wish I had that I didn't know was there. I think Jamie York like really put it out there with I think other education being grade focused. For me, I saw, okay, this is what you want from me. I also just was like, okay, what is the minimum I have to do to achieve what you want from me so I can spend my other time doing what I like to do. And in a way, look, it was almost like I was finding ways, I was learning, doing problem solving on ways to achieve what they wanted without focusing on the content they were giving me. So it was, to me, it seemed like my skills were more on the problem solving creative side of things, and they just wanted answers from me. And it was, I don't think, the best use of my, when I was growing up and learning. I think I could have learned a lot more and a lot better in a lot better ways through Waldorf. And having that, even translating to now, I see that in like my career with being a surgical microscope technician. Another example, this is just an example, is that when I was getting my certification, the person giving the certification test and training, he told us, he's like, look, I'm going to go through the training with you, and whether or not you get the certification, you're going to have to take a test at the end. That's going to be just a fill in the blank test. He's like, that test doesn't matter to me. He's like, if you can't actually do what you need to do in the field, and physically we had to work on the microscopes to know how to problem solve. He's like, if you can't do that, I'm not, even if you pass the test, I'm not going to give you the certification. And I think that, to me, is similar to the Waldorf education, where the hands-on approach, the learning to learn, that is what I think I would have benefited a lot more with that education when I was younger. The other, so that's, I guess, jumping forward, but going back to right now with me looking at what it offers, my wife has been pointing out a lot of things that I didn't think about with our daughter being only just turning 1. I'm being a lot more conscious of the toys we're getting, and she's pointing out like the little peg dolls and stuff that just have they'll just have the eyes on it or face. And I ask about that, and it's the imaginative play. It's not the doll or the character projecting an emotion for the kid to be like, oh, this is what the doll is doing. The kid's coming up with, what emotion does the doll have? And that's just this higher level that I never thought about that. So I'm just really interested in this whole journey we're about to have with education. We have our second kid coming here this month. So I'm very, I guess, intrigued and looking to learn a lot from all you guys and this whole, I guess, new education that I wasn't familiar with and I wish I had when I was younger.
I totally wish I had it when I was younger.
Yeah.
Paul, do you have anything to say about any comments about that? What you would say to other dads?
Sure, definitely. I actually really thought about this, and I jotted down some things I wanted to say. And that one of the big things I see is the kids, and it's been talked about directly and indirectly by everyone that's spoken so far, is this idea that the kids are learning to question and think, not just regurgitate. That's probably the single most favorite thing that I like about it, is that I see them doing that. And they're learning things in multiple ways to really understand. Now, I'm pretty sure this comes from Jamie's program in math, but watching the kids, my wife talk to the kids and be like, well, what is 10? Well, 10 can be 9 plus 1. 10 can also be 2 times 5. Using objects to count and sort. Just the other day, they were working on fractions, and I walked out of the office here to see them walking backwards and counting down by quarters through numbers. And so they're moving their body as they do it too. It's not just, okay, here's your multiplication table, memorize it. Although it is important, to have that skill as well. It's just not only that. Along with the drawings that related to what Jack was talking about, I see them not just making up stories or writing. I see them drawing them as well, and then they tend to remember the story. It means more to them. That seems to really help them, all the drawing. Another thing I've seen is the idea of putting things to bed, where I'm still figuring out exactly everything that means, but sometimes they'll be presented something or a story or some kind of a lesson, but it isn't explained to them on purpose. And then the next day, after they've had time to think about it overnight, they've come up with all these questions. Well, what about this? I bet it works like that. Or they're coming up with it on their own. And I just love watching them do that. And I know that I went through public school and it didn't work that way. So basically, I see the kids having insightful questions instead of just being told everything. Let's see. One of the other things, the benefit is watching, some people would say that Waldorf teaches to delay reading. I don't really like it. Watching what happened with my own son, I don't like that wording. I think everyone else is rushing reading, and Waldorf is actually doing it properly. But I watched my son, or both of them now, just one's further ahead than the other. It felt like he learned how to read and his vocabulary tripled like in a month, because he was, I guess the term would be developmentally ready to read. And we actually had a conversation with a friend of ours who's, I guess you would say, classically trained as a public school teacher, elementary school teacher, but she was even saying the same thing, that when she looked through the information that she was taught, that it actually did teach that a child is most developmentally ready to read at the age that Waldorf does it. And she's actually tried in her school system to get them to change that, unsuccessfully. But it wasn't stressful. It wasn't irritating. He wasn't frustrated. I mean, he was just excited to read, and it's like he just picked it up quickly. And now I'm watching my middle boy go through the same process. And it's a lot more fun to see them want to sit down with a book and read it and hear them using the vocabulary properly. And we get comments all the time from friends and family and people that meet the kids, like, boy, they really have quite a vocabulary. Boy, they really ask smart questions. They really pay attention. They really see things for what they are. It's really interesting. I don't want to go on too long here. Just a couple more thoughts. The kids get far less screen time than most kids. We don't have zero screen time, but it's far less than most kids. So I see them coming up with their own creative stories and gameplay all the time. Crafts, they'll just randomly get things out and start making, like one of the boys was making a catapult out of some tape and sticks and stuff. Outside play, they're a lot more interested in going outside to play. We've had families down the street saying, telling us, thank you that your kids invite my kids outside to play and get them outside. And so and I don't know any parent that wouldn't want their kids to play outside more, especially in today's, screen world, right? And then the last thing I would say is, more time together. The kids aren't, they want to be with mom and dad. They want to go outside and play. They want to read stories together. We watch movies and do stuff like that too, but I hope that was helpful. Those are my thoughts on that.
Yeah. No, I wanted to add just one example, I guess, of that for me, it showed kind of the power of not of teaching and learning outside of just the common practice. And there were, I don't know if you guys know this song, but we in fourth grade we learned a song that is like the all the states, and that to me, you sang, it was Alabama, Alaska, Arizona, Arkansas, California, Colorado, all the states in alphabetical order. And we had a substitute teacher come in, and it was, going over geography and all the states. She's like, okay, I want all the kids to write down as many states as you can think of. And she didn't know we knew this song. And the entire class wrote down in alphabetical order all 50 states. And she just dropped like this must be the most brilliant, like, what are they doing at this school? And I think that just shows the power of there's so many multiple ways to get the information, and for kids to learn to learn, besides a lot of the basic methods that I think are given now. So that was just an example to me, like when I thought back in my childhood, of like, wow, I was able to do that very quickly. And if I were to try and memorize that, all the states, in a different approach, there's no way I could have done it, and without doing it through music. So that was just an example I had that I think other parents might be able to relate to.
The song was 50 Nifty United States.
Yes, exactly.
I wasn't familiar with that one.
But you've had it sung to you more than once.
It's the best. I love that song.
Yeah. I think that's just a great example of how there's more than one way.
I had this experience where I said to a group of teachers who were in training, I said, I have one regret as a teacher. I taught all the way through 8th grade, and I wanted to write a rap song on digestion, and I didn't do it. And this other teacher contacted me several months later and said, well, I was thinking about what you said. I wrote that song. This fellow Jason teaches up in Minnesota, and he sent me a MP3 file on it, and it was great. It went like this. He said, it starts in your mouth when you're eating your food. Chew it up with your teeth. Yes, good. Break it up into pieces, lots and lots of bits, and get it all wet, all covered with spit. Yes, saliva, secretion. It helps with digestion. There's one thing I forgot to mention, the tongue. Oh, yeah, the tongue. Oh, yeah. And it went from there, but it was the greatest thing. I taught that to 7th graders. They knew the process of digestion from start to finish through that song that he wrote. It was great.
People didn't realize that Jack was going to rap today.
Yeah, there you go. Thanks to Jason.
It's kind of exciting. You don't know what's going to happen next. This has kind of been covered a bit, but how well do Waldorf educated children transition to college settings or pursuing particular trade? Like what advantages do they have? And we've kind of touched on this a bit before, but I thought I'd see if anyone else had anything else to add about that topic.
Hi, I think often I think we're going to have a continuous theme about competition and what people want to do. And, I've just also seen what children accomplish in high school because they still have the ability to have woodwork and, like you call it, metal shop. And so I think there's always a misconception that the children only go into graphic design or art or things like that. But I had a very interesting conversation once at a conference, and there were professors from UCT, and it's always like a bit of an anecdote. UCT, University of Cape Town, we said you can always see the Waldorf children are the ones that sit right in front, ask the most questions, get things done quickly, because they're kind of just used to it. Their main lesson books from class one, you're doing project work. Ultimately, you have to take ownership of that from day one. And so what my experience is just seeing what children have experienced in a rich curriculum right through from kindergarten, and they find what they want to do. So I've been fortunate enough to have taken a class through and seen them in high school, and then you kind of see that little fire ignite. And many times they want to do what they're passionate about, not because mom and dad want you to become an accountant or a lawyer or a doctor, and you have the capability of doing it. So they really just get on with it, and they are passionate about it. And in our final year, they do their class 12, and then they do their 13th year in which they write their finals. And what I find is they're just learning. They're learning to write a test. They're prepared, and they've chosen their subjects, and they want to go to university, and they want to do their thing. So they get quite driven. They're often quite bored because it's just tests. They're not doing anything except getting that piece of paper. So and because your teacher kind of knows you, you've got your guardian and you have a relationship, you really see what the child is interested in. And there's always this guidance, and being in a relationship with the parents, you tell them this is what your child is really good at, and support this. And then they find their way, and they find their niche, and they are fine. They're fine. And you know what I think, we've touched up on fear, because it's our fear. We want the best for our children. We want them to have the degree. We want them to have the job. We want them to do those. Or one of these days we're 6 feet under, and no one's going to care about what you got and what you didn't get. But we want them. We all failed in maths, but we want our child to have a distinction, and we want our child to do science, but we don't know how to balance a formula. And so we have to find that balance and really see it. And I always find it's very powerful in the high school, when that each subject addresses the child's development, even in high school. When you look at Parsifal, when you look at acids and bases, and I love to see when that awakening comes, and again, they get on with it. They just do it, because no one sits behind you in a Waldorf school. You take ownership. So sometimes when I do speak to them, they find university a breeze. It's not everyone, but they enjoy it, and they find their way in the world. And often because of a rich curriculum, they want to see the world. They want to go and experience. They want to savor it. And you often get, I've bumped into an ex-student. She did, she went into chemistry. She went into genetics. She did exceptionally well, hated it. And she loves doing yoga, and she loves working with children, and she's become a fantastic, she's got the degree, but she hated it. She said, it's empty, it doesn't feed me. I said, yeah, you're a real Waldorf child. But so they rise to those challenges. It's just in the experience of the children I've met.
Can I just give you an experience of my own daughter, who's 25 now, and who went to school for international relations, and was incredibly artistic and creative. And she made this map on the wall behind me, which, I don't know if you can, scale wise, it's like 6 feet tall. It's far away. But she's does interior design and costume design and art, and she's like just really creative individual, but found a passion for helping people, and went into international relations so that she could help bring educational programs to places like, for girls in India, where young girls are not encouraged to go to school. Especially in rural areas. And so she traveled to India and went around and, interviewed people in the government and tried to find out how she could help to to bring educational programs there. She's traveling all over the world all the time, and as far as her being prepared for university, like you said, Gerhard, she just, it was a breeze. She was like, what's so difficult about this? And she did the thing where she wanted to engage with her professors, where she wanted to sit up front. She wanted to ask all the questions, and she she was incredibly well prepared for that journey. Yeah, that's all.
Okay.
Because she had a ravenous mind, right? That's one thing that I think Waldorf education gives these kids, is just a voracious mind. They just want to know more about how it works, what happens, what's the process, how do we get there, what are the questions, and what are the questions behind the questions. And I just think that's a beautiful thing. And if you have that, you're prepared for anything.
Our youngest, Soraya, asks questions all day long, and it's always keeping me on my toes. And she asks the craziest questions, and some of it's like, I about died the other day. She's like, Dad, if the virus comes from China, why do we have this thing that says it's made in China, and this other thing that says it's made in China, and the virus came from China? It's like, that's a very good question. I don't have very good answers for you, but that's a very good observation. And she's 9 and she's asking questions like that. I don't know if that's the best example, but is nonstop questions with her about why things work. This doesn't make sense. Why do people do this? Why is that happening? And it's like, you're asking better questions than most of the adults that I know right now.
Can I tag on to that?
Sure.
So Eric, it is interesting. We are producing, I just want to maybe add a little bit of a twist to some of this conversation. I wouldn't make the statement that Waldorf graduates have an easier life and an easier path than other students. Think of it. If we're training these students, training is not even the right word, but if we're teaching these students in a way such that they go out into the world being more questioning, to be what I would argue is more than anything that's needed in the world today, is the ability to think independently, to think for yourself, to not just do what you're told. If that's true, if we're truly able to do that, and I do think as Waldorf educators, we're actually quite successful in doing that. That's not the easy path. That comes with some added challenge. And I just wanted to say that, there are two things that maybe are added challenges that our Waldorf students have that maybe other students don't have so much. The first one is trying to decide what the heck you're going to do with your life. Because it's often not an easy choice for Waldorf students, because they have so many of them, not all, but many of them end up graduating from Waldorf high school having so many interests that it's hard for them to focus into one thing and to decide what to major in and so forth. Because the reality is, when you get to college, you can't do it all anymore. Whereas, they could do it all, pretty much, definitely all the way up through 8th grade, and largely in high school still keep doing that. That's the first thing. And the second thing is, I tell my Waldorf students that you are given the burden that you have to be extra careful about choosing where you're going to go to college. Because the reality is, if they just go anywhere, oftentimes I find they get disappointed, because they get out there and they find that the education that they're seeing then in university and college does not automatically have that same level of meaningfulness that they had, what they were used to in high school. And they can end up disappointed. They don't automatically get that connection to their professors and instructors that they had in high school. So that's an added challenge. They have to be really careful about where they're going to go to college to make sure that basically where they're going is going to match their experience and, perhaps subconscious expectations about what a good education should be. So they really do have to be careful. And, you know, Gerhard, where are you? What country are you in?
I'm in South Africa.
That's what I thought, you know, and we do have an added advantage. I was remembering that from I saw before. And so, you know, you've obviously it's a very different educational system in most of the world than it is in the US. And one of the advantages I would say of the US system, not that it's better in all ways, but in one way, they have a tremendous number of colleges you can choose from. So, you know, it's not all about status. It's not, and we're somehow that's ingrained in us, isn't it? That your goal is to go to, you know, I grew up on the East Coast, and it's especially strong in the East Coast that you want to go to the college that has the most status somehow, the most prestigious school that you can get into. And honestly, I think I encourage my students to look more deeply and to realize that, you know, that you want to have the best education for you. And there are some colleges and universities out there that it is all about a game. It is all about just test scores, and it's not very personal. And it may be a great education in many ways, but maybe that's not the best place for you. You really need to think about these sort of things. So I just wanted to point some of that out.
One thing I'd add too is, while it is great to question things and be inquisitive, there's a burden to that as well, because one thing I've learned is that there's things that I question and it makes people super uncomfortable. And so, so I have to balance that of like, it's okay to have this question, but what's the right platform or avenue for me to be asking those questions? And so I guess there's a balancing act that kids have to figure out how they navigate the world, because there's times I've asked questions, like the example of me asking the question of the woman at the State Board of Education, where she's super angry that I even had the question. So there's a burden to that as well. And I think that's something that we have to figure out a way to help kids balance that too, because they should question things and they should be learning things, but also figure out the best way to do it so that doesn't cause some doors to slam. And that's tricky, especially lately. So another thing that we've had confusion about is what the role of sports is in Waldorf education. And we've talked a bit about the competition that gets driven in and how competition's important. And so this was I was going to ask Gerhard about this specifically, what your take was on that.
This is kind of a bit of a bread and butter question for me, because as we're also a country, we love our sport, it's competitive, and it becomes very controversial of people's perceptions thereof. Okay, so I've been very lucky to have coached all kinds of codes of sport. And so again, with everything that we do, we look again at age appropriate. Okay, the competition, okay, I'm going to use your NFL. Okay, everybody wants to be Tom Brady, but there are 300 million. Is it a quarterback? Am I right? Is he a quarterback? Right. In our country, it's rugby. Okay, so I'm learning about NFL. But so like in our country, it's the rugby, and we push, and you go to a good school, and you get a bursary and all that. But you know what? Your knee pops, and your parents don't have that kind of money, and it escalates. Okay, so that's just your cautionary tale. So what we do is, for me, I love movement with children, and at the moment I've got class 2s. So I do roly-polies with them. They're in their bodies. They are strong, you know, and they move. And these days, you know, I think everything is in fitness is about strength, but children don't know how to move. Children should move, and they should move well, and they should know. And I get everybody wants a six-pack and a chest out to here, and they, you know, they can't do a pull-up, and they can't do a roly-poly, and they can't. But there's a way that's also moving into really people getting in touch with their movement. And I've just seen the benefits of what that does just in the morning before you start your day. And I love it. Juggling, all of that incorporated. So there is a place for sport, and it's good. Just like, again, your main lesson, there should be discipline as well. You know, there are rules in a main lesson. There are rules when you do math, science, whatever, and you have a will. The same with your sport. And I think there's a misconception. Yeah, everyone just runs. We play and we find fairies and we look. It's not what happens. There's a structure, and it's good for them. The children should have structure as well. But what we want to try and ingrain is, don't shout at the ref, don't scream, don't be a bad sportsman. There's an inner discipline. I was very fortunate enough when I started at a Waldorf school, they had rock climbing on the premises. So we had natural cliffs. I came from a conventional school where I was coaching soccer, rugby, cricket, swimming, cross country and all this. And I came to school and I didn't know anything about rock climbing, and I learned and I loved it because I saw how children do the inner work. It was the beautiful analogy of you are in competition with yourself. From a child scared of heights at the beginning, not knowing how to boulder, and you see these boys and girls growing up and being strong in their bodies and doing a pull-up on a door. And of course, their teacher can't do that, you know, but and so that is the focus. It's not that there's no sport, but we work on it being age appropriate. And you know, I've had the horrible experiences of reffing a game or being there and parents shouting and, you know, screaming at their child because they've maybe missed a ball or missed a thing. And for a man that I love the sport, I don't like that, and it's not right. And there's a way of living vicariously through your children, but then there's also, and I think if your child has a skill, hone it. You know, like many sporting coaches, they man manage. Not that you want to man manage a child, because I don't think that's appropriate. But see that your child is good at something. But if he's got a golden arm and he's 6, you can't go and throw a ball 600 times in the afternoon. You're going to hurt him. But you can see it, and everybody wants their child to be a good golfer because maybe they didn't take care of their pension plan, and maybe that's going to work out for them. But this is and I love speaking to dads about that and saying there is a place for it. And you know what, if schools are small, there are clubs. And again, I speak, you have Little League and things like that, am I correct? And Pee Wee League and so on. And I think people have also moved on of seeing, you know, the little boys or girls, they get hurt on a field and come on, shake off the tears, let's go. And it's not good. So you move away from that. And of course, children that stay in classes together all the way through, they play together. And I was also very blessed to have coached my son. I was teaching and my children on the same school, and I could coach soccer with them. And you know what, dads, we forget they must have fun. And you know what, the more fun they have, the better they are, and they score goals and they win and they enjoy themselves. So it is that moment of, again, taking what, even in your lessons and having that structure and having that rhythm, bringing it onto a sports field, because it makes them strong, it makes them good, and they see the whole picture, and then they find their passion. You know, I recently I heard of a boy, his whole life, his parents had enough funds to assist him in his golfing career. He was fantastic. He was sponsored. He was everything. When he turned, and the rest of us, when we heard the story, we were so, why did you give it up? When he turned 18, he said to his dad, I have had enough. I can't do the hotel rooms anymore. Yes, he's sponsored by Under Armour and Titleist and everything, but he didn't have a childhood. He didn't have friends. Yes, he had a tutor, and he's good. And now he hates it. He hates it. He doesn't want to do it anymore. So, and again, those are cautionary tales, but sorry, it's my little soapbox thing. And as much as we love sport and we love the movement and we want, again, the best for our children, we do it differently in just that there is also a consciousness in sport.
That's really good. And as far as movement goes, we always talk about having pliable exhaustion, where we get some of the energy burned out, so that and one example that we used to live in San Diego, and now we live in Arizona, but we lived a few blocks from the beach, and there was sandy beach, but there was also like cliffs and rocks. And there were days where I would take them out, and we would traverse one end of these giant boulders to get to the other end, and because it made them have to think as well as like where's the right place to step and how to get to one end to the other. And I would take them, and there was some concern that it was a bit dangerous, but I'd take them and come back, and they were so agreeable after we would do that exercise. But Soraya didn't like to see all the crabs running around because she thought there was lots of crabs and she thought they were going to get her, but they didn't care about what she was doing. But so here's a question that's for Gerhard and Mark is what's the best way for dads to support their children's Waldorf teacher?
Mark, you want to go first?
All right. In my experience, especially for dads who are less familiar with Waldorf education, and Eric, you brought up that most of the signups that you have, most of the registrations that you have are driven by the moms. And
probably 95%, I would say.
Yeah.
More.
And so the dads sometimes are on board, but not sure what to do about it. Sometimes they, I've had experiences where the dad is opposed and is looking for more of the kind of education that Jamie was talking about earlier, where it's just like facts, test. So as a Waldorf dad, I think there are three things that I thought about. One is to educate yourself about Waldorf education and about the reasons we approach it in the way we do for the sake of the children. We approach them in ways that are developmentally appropriate in all of their stages. We approach it with a very deep thought and energetic holding of the child and their journey. And we approach it according to each child that is in our care, not like this is a group of students and I'm going to treat them all the same. And so for the dads, I would encourage you to read some books about Waldorf education, just to understand a little bit better what the process is that we're working with. And it can kind of be a leap of faith. And I'm speaking especially to the dads who are skeptical about it, who are on board but not sure what's really going on. It's a little bit of a leap of faith, but trust your teacher, because the teachers really, I mean, our main thing is having the best interest of each of the students at heart. And I mean that truly, not just as a figure of speech. It is from the heart that we approach these children. Head, heart, and hands, yes, but there's a holding of the group and of each individual child that it's deep. So it's taking that leap of faith and trusting that your teacher is there, and that we do approach each child individually. It's not just a catch-all for everybody. And then as far as supporting your teacher at home, there's often an impulse, especially with dads, and I'm speaking to my own experience as well, of we want to fix things. We want to fix it. If we perceive there's a problem, we want to just like make it right. And we as parents, I think, need to allow space for the students to make their own mistakes and to fail, and sometimes fail big, because that's powerful learning that happens. To be there to support them, right? And and not to not to say, oh well, you failed at that, but to say, oh, I recognize that learning that just happened for you, to accept and observe and support, and not try to overmanage or to fix things. Instead of offering a solution to, so the child is doing their work from main lesson, right? And they've got some homework to do where they're it's a math problem, or it's a geographical drawing, a map of something, and when they're having trouble figuring something out, to be there to offer a question that inspires, rather than to say, oh, it's like this, and fixing it. And I I'm speaking from my own experience, because I fix things. I do, like, something's broken in the house, I don't call a guy, I get my tools and I fix it, right? And so, so I had to learn with my kids that there is tremendous value in being there, supporting, observing, and perhaps nudging in a direction that will help them discover it on their own, because it's so much more powerful to the learning of the child when they discover the solution, when they are allowed, when they're given space to make that discovery. That stays with them, and swooping in and fixing it and saving the day, it saves the day, but it doesn't last. My experience.
And it's huge for their confidence when they figured it out for themselves.
Yeah.
I just want to ask, just add a little thing. I think sometimes with the dads, when we talk about the gnomes and the fairies and the things, I think there's this, not reticence, because I mean, if you think about the Grimm's fairy tales, they're actually so beautiful, and even you read through those, some of them are quite horrific. But I got very excited when we started this, and sorry, Matt, I think did you start the Waldorf Dads website or group?
Yeah,
because that in itself, I think when you look at statistics, and Eric, when you start conversation with 95% are moms, and I get that's the way it's going. I just think it's very often the dads sometimes get involved when things go wrong, or they're not happy about, or there's a struggle, so it's not the best delivery, or then again, like you say, let's fix it. So I think often there's the fear factor, or we don't understand it. So my one thing is to always ask, don't make fun of it. It's a little thing, because you sometimes the children are small and you're making fun of, let's say, the fairies, or you undermining it. And I don't want to come over preachy, but have that conversation, have the buy-in with your teacher. And for me, I love having moments like this. And sometimes the dad's also just too shy to maybe ask something in a parent's evening. And like, for one of my things, I've wanted to maybe have a Zoom meeting where only the dads come. And I don't mean to be exclusive, but then, then they can ask, can we have a conversation about, because we don't maybe understand eurythmy so well, or why is the reading happening so late? And Paul explained that so nicely, but you can bring that again across and allay those fears, because you always have that conversation late in the year. I get it, but I'm worried. And they come very diplomatically. So I think the support, as much as you can support the teacher, you have to it becomes community very quickly, and we bandy that about easily. But and dudes, we don't ask questions. We just, hey, you know what? I'll go fetch my toolbox and everything will be okay. And you know what? I'll just suck it up. And then it doesn't work. And then at the end, you start being passive aggressive, making fun of it, and you're doing damage. And when you could have just asked a question or join Matt's little group and say, hey man, Matt, what's going on here? Because I think those things are very, very powerful, and it works well.
Yeah, and that's kind of why I started it. Is I'm not pretending to be an expert. I'm saying I'm being proactive about my daughter's education, and then now my son later this month, about being involved with it. And so I'm like, for the other dads out there, and some of my other friends who just had kids too, it's like, let's look at this and learn with them. I'm excited about it. So yeah, I'm not trying to be an expert. I'm trying to learn it because I just feel like I would have benefited from this when I was their age and on. So
I think it's amazing, Matt, that you're starting this when your daughter is under a year old. That's like,
yeah,
that's pretty incredible. That's, you talk about proactive. That's really proactive.
Yeah, I'm trying to. If you see, I'm kind of muting here, muting there, because she's my wife trying to fall asleep now, so she's being a little vocal, which is super cozy, but trying to keep it so everyone can hear. Yeah, no, I the early education too is that's I guess where I'm involved. You guys, it sounds like, have the kids are a little bit older and getting into the reading and stuff, and I'm really excited about that. So I feel like I'm gonna learn a lot, like you said, from you guys, hearing that the kids are learning to talk later maybe than other kids, but it's like the understanding and the platform, the foundation being much stronger and more solidified. I'm really excited about this. So yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
It looks like we're running out of time, so we're going to wrap things up, but I'm really thinking about doing this again. So we're going to figure out when. I had a couple things to say too, as far as like we're talking about the dads and the moms kind of, the moms initiating it and the dads trying to figure it out. What's really funny is over the last 15 years, we have been roped into so much marriage counseling. Like, it's like, come to us for curriculum. And there are times where the dad's opposed to it, but there's times where there's already a problem in the marriage and the mom and the kids like, we just don't want to deal with dad. So we're just going to go off over here and do this. And the dad's left behind going, where did they go? What's just happened here? Now they're doing these things. I don't get it. And I guess I'll just sit and watch TV because I'm out of the loop. So it's like, we've seen both ways, but yeah, we've had so much having to helping people solve problems that were not really like within our original scope of what we were doing. It's been extremely interesting. Mark mentioned about reading books on Waldorf, and I know, Jack, you have a book on Waldorf. What can you tell us about the book you've written that you would recommend that people check out?
Well, I never recommend my own books, but it's called Understanding Waldorf, Teaching from the Inside Out. And we had a grant to write that book to explain Waldorf education in an accessible way. And that was the hope when we put the book together. Yeah, I also had a book on dads that I wrote years ago called Covering Home. And it's lessons on the art of fathering from the game of baseball, which is a little eccentric, but two things that I loved. I loved baseball and I loved being a dad, so they went together. But I also wanted to say, Eric, just because you're wrapping up, I just wanted to say thank you for putting this together. And I just wanted to thank the gentlemen who were here, because it was really a pleasure to listen to everything everyone had to say.
Well, thank you so much. And we're going to, when we post this up on our site and on our platforms, we'll put the links up for everybody's websites that have websites so that they can they can find you that way and learn more about all of you, because I think there's a lot of people out there that will want to know more about what all of you guys do. So yeah, I think we're going to wrap it up, but I'm really thankful to have had this time. I could talk about this all day. I was feeling in the zone listening to all of you guys and talking about this. But yes, I very much appreciate it. And it looks like I'm going to sign off. Does anybody else have any closing things they'd like to say before we go?
I'd say one thing, and that is I'd advise, if you're really curious about this sort of thing, I'd advise dads or anybody else, if you want one of the best arguments for Waldorf education, to watch Sir Ken Robinson's TED Talk. Perhaps some of you have seen it. Do schools kill creativity? And it's a really interesting thing, if for no other reason that he, as far as I know, doesn't have a connection to Waldorf education. But you listen to what he says, and you I think, can't help but to look at education in a different way.
Yeah. Oh, thank you very much. Well, we're going to sign off, but thank you, and have a good day or evening or whatever is ahead of you for the rest of wherever you're at in the world. So have a good day in the evening. Bye.
Thanks so much. Nice meeting you all.
Thanks,
Take care.
everybody.
Bye.
Honored to be here.